The first thing my older sister, Vanessa, did when I walked into the funeral home was look me up and down with a cold, mocking smirk on her face. She didn't say hello. She didn't offer a hug or ask how I was holding up after losing the only person who actually cared about us. Instead, she leaned over to her wealthy husband, Julian, and whispered loud enough for the people in the back pews to hear. "Look at what she wore to Grandpa's service. Did she pick that up from a thrift store bargain bin?" Julian chuckled under his breath, adjusting his designer tie while my mother, Beatrice, shook her head in visible disgust. Before we jump into today's emotional story, drop a 777 in the comments below, and let us know which city or country you are watching from today. If you love inspiring stories about resilience, family drama, and unexpected karma, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on all notifications so you never miss a single upload. Trust me, the ending of this one will leave you completely speechless. Now let us rewind back to where this incredible story began. My mother crossed her arms, stepped closer to me, and said in a harsh whisper, "Honestly, Chloe, you couldn't even bother to dress decently for your own grandfather's memory? You look like a total embarrassment standing next to your sister. Look at Vanessa. Her dress costs more than your rent. And here you are looking like a pauper in front of all our family friends." I stood near the entrance of the polished church lobby in my simple, faded black dress. The only dark dress I owned, bought off a discount rack 3 years ago for a job interview. I kept my chin up, though my chest burned with a mix of sorrow and shame. I watched my family move around that grand cathedral like actors performing in a high-budget play. They weren't weeping. They weren't reminiscing about the wonderful man who had built our family's foundation. They were busy admiring their own reflection in the stained glass windows, checking their expensive gold watches, and whispering about how the seating chart in the front row should reflect their social standing. My name is Chloe. I was 26 years old, working long shifts as a medical assistant at a public clinic while trying to finish my degree. I lived in a tiny studio apartment on the rough side of town, constantly calculating every dollar just to make sure I had enough for groceries and electricity. My family, on the other hand, lived in an entirely different world. My parents owned a massive estate in a gated community, complete with marble floors and a 4-car garage. My sister, Vanessa, had married into money and spent her days shopping, traveling, and posting her lavish lifestyle online. I was always labeled as the disappointment, the broke daughter, the one who chose serving others over chasing status, the one who, according to my mother, simply lacked ambition. But there was one person in our family who never looked down on me. My grandfather, Arthur. Grandpa Arthur was a self-made man who had built a multi-million-dollar commercial logistics company from absolute scratch. He started as a lone truck driver, pulling 18-hour shifts in the freezing cold until he saved enough money to buy his first vehicle, then his second, until he owned a fleet of over 200 trucks across the country. By the time I was born, he was a man of immense wealth, but you would never know it by looking at him. He lived in the same modest brick house on Oak Street he'd bought 40 years ago. He drove an old pickup truck with a rusted tailgate and wore flannel shirts with worn-out elbows. Grandpa Arthur didn't care about designer labels, expensive jewelry, or country club memberships. He cared about character, hard work, and genuine heart. Every Sunday afternoon, while the rest of my family made endless excuses about being too busy with brunch, golf, or shopping trips, I drove 35 minutes across town to sit with him on his back porch. We drank hot black tea, ate homemade biscuits, and talked about everything from history to life lessons. He always kept a small, worn leather-bound notebook in his front shirt pocket. Every now and then, after we had a meaningful conversation, he would pull out a vintage fountain pen and jot something down in those yellowed pages. I never asked him what he was writing. It felt like his sacred private sanctuary, and I respected him too much to pry. When Grandpa fell severely ill 2 years ago with late-stage kidney failure and heart complications, my family's true colors became undeniably clear. The doctors told us he needed constant monitoring, specialized home care, and emotional support. My parents visited him exactly twice in those 2 long years, both times staying for less than 20 minutes just to ask if his power of attorney paperwork was up to date. Vanessa sent a synthetic flower basket with a pre-printed card signed by her personal assistant. None of them wanted to sit in a quiet room with a sick old man. I was the only one who showed up week after week, month after month. I adjusted my work schedule, sacrificed my sleep, and spent every spare hour by his side. I learned how to track his complex medication schedule. I cooked the low-sodium meals his doctors recommended, feeding him spoon by spoon when his hands grew too weak to hold a fork. I sat beside his bed through agonizing hospital visits and long, terrifying nights when his breath grew short and the fear of dying kept him awake. I held his frail, trembling hand in the dark and sang his favorite old songs until he fell asleep. Never once in those 2 years did I think about his millions. Never once did I ask about his estate. I loved him with all my heart, and I simply refused to let a noble man suffer alone in the dark. "You're the only one who truly sees me, Chloe," he whispered to me one rainy Sunday evening, his voice weak and trembling as his frail fingers squeezed mine. "Your mother and sister come around when they want a photo or a favor, but you bring your soul into this room. You give me your time when you have nothing to gain from it." I just kissed his forehead, wiped away a quiet tear, and told him that as long as I was breathing, he would never be alone. He passed away on a chilly Tuesday morning, holding my hand until his very last breath. His funeral was held 5 days later at one of the most exclusive cathedrals in the city. My parents insisted on lavish decorations, high-end catering, and expensive floral arrangements, not out of respect for Grandpa's simple life, but because they wanted to impress their wealthy business associates. As the eulogy ended and the casket was lowered, my family immediately gathered near the foyer, whispering with quiet excitement. The lawyer said the reading of the will happens at the house immediately after this. I heard my mother say to my aunt in a hushed, greedy voice, "Arthur always said the company and the primary holdings would remain in the family. It's only right that the ones who carry the family name get the lion's share." Vanessa smirked, adjusting her pearl necklace. "Well, obviously. It's not like anyone who works a dead-end job could handle managing real assets anyway. Some people just aren't built for wealth." She cast a cold, mocking glance straight at me, standing a few feet away in my faded black dress. After the service, everyone drove to Grandpa's estate for the official reading of the will. The living room was packed with relatives sitting on silk-upholstered chairs. I walked in quietly, aiming to sit in the far back near the doorway just to listen and pay my final respects before leaving quietly. But before I could take a seat, my sister stepped directly into my path, her eyes gleaming with contempt. "Chloe, honestly, why are you even here?" Vanessa asked, her voice dripping with artificial sympathy. "This is a serious legal procedure for the core family assets. You're wearing a $20 dress, you live in a tiny rental, and you clearly have zero business understanding. You're just going to make things uncomfortable for everyone when the numbers are read. Why don't you wait in the kitchen or just head home?" My mother stepped up beside her, nodding in agreement. "Vanessa is right, sweetheart. Your grandfather was a practical businessman. He knew you didn't have the drive or the sophistication for his level of wealth. There's no point in sitting here to hear things that don't concern you." I felt a rush of blood to my cheeks, the familiar sting of tears pricking my eyes. But then I remembered Grandpa Arthur's voice, how he always told me to stand tall and never let arrogant people define my worth. I looked my mother and sister straight in the eyes, adjusted my simple coat and said firmly, "He was my grandfather too. I'm staying." I walked right past them and took a seat near the window. A few minutes later, the estate lawyer, a distinguished senior attorney named Mr. Sterling who had managed Grandpa's affairs for over 30 years, walked into the room carrying a leather briefcase. He set it on the oak desk, adjusted his glasses, and looked around the room with an unreadable, solemn expression. "Before we proceed with the formal legal distribution of the estate," Mr. Sterling announced, his voice echoing clearly across the silent room, "Arthur instructed me to read a personal letter that he handwrote 8 months ago. He gave me strict orders that this note must be read out loud to the entire family, without a single word omitted, before any asset distribution is revealed." My mother sat up straight, smoothing her designer dress. Vanessa smiled arrogantly, crossing her legs as if preparing to receive an award. Mr. Sterling pulled a folded piece of stationery from a sealed envelope, The handwriting was unmistakably Grandpa's, slightly shaky but firm and deliberate. He cleared his throat and began to read. To my family. If you are listening to these words, then my journey on this earth has come to an end. Throughout my life, I worked tirelessly to build an empire, believing that providing financial security for my family was the ultimate expression of love. But as age crept up on me and my body began to fail, I realized a bitter truth. Money doesn't create character, it merely exposes it. An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. My mother's smile faltered slightly. Mr. Sterling continued reading. In the last 2 years of my life, I was sick, weak, and terrified of the dark. I learned very quickly who loved me for who I was, and who loved me for what I owned. Most of you sent cards, dropped by for photo opportunities, or called only to ask about my financial papers. Only one person in this entire family chose to show up week after week. Only one person sat beside my bed during long nights, fed me when I couldn't feed myself, and gave me her time without ever asking for a single penny, a single piece of property, or a single mention in my will. Mr. Sterling paused, looking up from the paper and locking his eyes directly on me. That person is my granddaughter, Chloe. Vanessa's jaw tightened. My mother shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her face turning pale. Mr. Sterling resumed reading Grandpa's final words. Chloe came to see me in a simple dress, driving an old car, asking for nothing. She gave me the greatest gift a human being can offer another: unconditional love and presence. Some of you have mocked her for her modesty, for her lack of greed, and for her simple lifestyle. But in my eyes, she is the richest person in this family. The lawyer took a slow breath before reading the next section. For these reasons, I have restructured my entire estate. I leave my primary residence, my personal financial portfolio, and 90% of my controlling shares in Arthur Logistics, valued at approximately $5 million, to my granddaughter Chloe. The room completely exploded into a stunned, breathless silence. The entire atmosphere transformed from smug confidence to absolute horror in a matter of seconds. What? Vanessa shrieked, jumping out of her chair so fast her purse fell to the floor. This is a joke. This has to be a mistake. She's wearing a cheap, trashy dress. She works at a clinic. She doesn't know the first thing about running a multi-million-dollar logistics company. My mother stood up next, her face flushed with fury. Mr. Sterling, this is utterly preposterous. My father was elderly, he was on heavy medications, and he was clearly manipulated by Chloe. She took advantage of his weak state. We will be contesting this ridiculous will in court immediately. Mr. Sterling didn't even flinch. He reached into his briefcase, pulled out a second legal folder, and laid it calmly on the table. Mrs. Beatrice, Mr. Sterling replied in a cold, professional tone, Arthur anticipated this exact reaction from you and your daughter. 8 months ago, before executing these documents, your father underwent 2 independent psychological evaluations conducted by top board-certified psychiatrists. Both evaluations certified that Arthur was of 100% sound mind, sharp memory, and fully aware of his decisions. Furthermore, the will includes an absolute no-contest clause. Any beneficiary who attempts to challenge this will in a court of law will automatically forfeit their remaining inheritance entirely. My mother froze. Vanessa looked as though she had been slapped across the face. Mr. Sterling looked around the room and added, to the rest of the family, including Beatrice and Vanessa, Arthur has left $50,000 each, along with his written wish that you use that money to reflect on your values, your arrogance, and how you treat those who have less material wealth than you. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. The sound of pure greed colliding with a legal wall echoed in every corner of the room. Vanessa looked at me with pure, unadulterated hatred, but she couldn't open her mouth without risking the $50,000 she desperately needed to maintain her extravagant lifestyle. I stood up slowly from my chair near the window. I didn't feel smug. I didn't shout or mock them back. I looked at my mother and my sister, 2 people who had judged me by my cheap dress, my small apartment, and my humble job, and I realized how truly poor they were in spirit. Grandpa didn't leave me this money because I asked for it, I said softly, my voice calm and steady. He left it to me because he trusted my heart. I am going to use this estate to build healthcare clinics for families who can't afford care, and to keep his legacy alive with honor. Without waiting for another word from them, I walked out of the mansion, stepped into the crisp afternoon air, and drove straight to Grandpa Arthur's house. I walked onto the back porch where we had shared so many Sundays, sat down in his favorite wooden chair, and let the quiet tears flow freely. Not for the millions, but for the incredible man who had loved me for who I was. A few days later, while cleaning out his nightstand, I found his worn leather notebook. I opened it to the very last page, dated just 3 weeks before he passed away. In his shaky handwriting it read, "Chloe came by today wearing her worn black sweater. She brought fresh tea and read my favorite book to me while I rested. She has no idea that she is about to inherit everything I built." People like her sister look at clothes and price tags, but Chloe looks at the human soul. I am leaving my legacy in the hands of the only person who understands what true wealth really means. I pressed the notebook against my heart, looking out at the golden sunset, knowing that his love would guide me for the rest of my life. Never judge a person's value by the price tag on their clothes, the car they drive, or the job they hold. True wealth isn't found in a bank account. It's revealed in how you treat people when you think they have nothing left to offer you. Thank you so much for watching today's story. If this message touched your heart, please leave a like, subscribe to our channel, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. We will see you in our next story.